What does a billionaire on the verge of signing a $100 million deal have in common with the waitress pouring his water? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. At least that's what Harrison Sterling thought. He was sitting in Aurelia, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, about to change the world of green energy. The contracts were open, the pen was in his hand. But he never saw her coming. He never imagined that a quiet waitress with tired eyes and a tragic past held the one secret that could either save his entire legacy or shatter it into a million hesitations. He was about to sign. Then she leaned in, and with a whisper that cut through the silence, she said 4 words that stopped his world cold. "That's the wrong formula." The air in Aurelia was thick with the scent of money. Not the crisp, vulgar smell of new bills, but the ancient, ingrained aroma of generational wealth, a subtle perfume of truffle oil, vintage leather, and effortless power. Isabella Rossi breathed it in every night. For 8 hours, she'd glide between tables, draped in starched white linen, a ghost in a black uniform, her own identity dissolving into the polished mahogany and crystal glassware. Tonight, Table 12 was the center of the restaurant's universe. It was an unofficial throne nestled in a secluded alcove with a panoramic view of the glittering Manhattan skyline. And seated at its head was the King Harrison Sterling. Bella knew the name, of course. Everyone did. Sterling, the boy genius from MIT who founded Sterling Dynamics and was now, at 38, a titan of the tech industry. His face, usually seen on the cover of Forbes or Wired, was even more intense in person. Sharp jaw eyes the color of a stormy sea, and an aura of restless energy that seemed barely contained by his bespoke Tom Ford suit. He wasn't just in the room. He owned the space it occupied. With him were 2 men in similarly expensive suits, investors Bella guessed by their cautious expressions and deferential posture. These were Mr. Davenport, a silver-haired patriarch of an old banking family, and Kenji Tanaka from a Tokyo-based venture capital fund. But Bella's attention was drawn to the 4th man, Dr. Robert Kendrick Sterling's head of R&D. He was preening his chest, puffed out, basking in the glow of his boss's success. Bella had served them their appetizers, a delicate, seared scallop dish, and was now refilling their water glasses, her movements practiced and invisible. It was a skill she had perfected to be present, but unseen to hear everything and register nothing. The efficiency is unprecedented. Harrison Kendrick was saying, his voice a little too loud. The Sterling-Kendrick catalyst and I do appreciate the joint credit. Truly will reduce the energy cost of electrolysis by 60%. This isn't incremental. This is a paradigm shift. Green hydrogen becomes cheaper than natural gas. Harrison Sterling nodded a curt, impatient gesture. He tapped a sleek black tablet on the table. Show them the core equation, Robert. The part that matters. Kendrick, beaming, picked up a pen and smoothly uncapped it. He grabbed a thick linen napkin, a minor sacrilege in a place like Aurelia, and began to write. Bella's heart gave a strange, painful lurch. It was an echo from a life she had buried 6 years ago. A life of whiteboards, quantum mechanics, and the thrilling pursuit of discovery. A life before the betrayal, before the debt, before this black uniform became her skin. She tried to look away, to focus on the condensation of the water pitcher in her hand. It's not your world anymore, Bella. But she couldn't. Her eyes were drawn to the elegant, flowing script on the napkin. Kendrick was explaining his work with condescending simplicity. It boils down to maximizing the probability of quantum tunneling for the proton transfer. We manipulate the electron spin state of the platinum-iridium lattice. The equation governing the catalytic efficiency, I, is what secures our patent." He finished with a flourish, sliding the napkin to the center of the table. Mr. Davenport and Mr. Tanaka stared at the equation with the polite, uncomprehending reverence of men who dealt in dollars, not Daltons. Sterling, however, studied it with fierce intensity. And the quantum tunneling probability? Function psi. It's stable across all temperatures and pressures we've modeled, ironclad Kendrick said with a smug smile. That's the secret sauce. My own proprietary work. Bella froze. Her hand holding the heavy pitcher trembled almost imperceptibly. Her gaze was fixed on the last term of the equation, puisque S. She could see the full notation in her mind, the complex integral she had spent 2 years of her PhD program deriving. The world around her fell away. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of conversation, the city lights outside the window. It all vanished. She was back in a dusty university lab smelling of ozone and old coffee. She was standing in front of a whiteboard, her hand covered in marker dust, arguing passionately with her advisor, Professor Albright. She remembered the exhilarating moment of breakthrough, the elegant simplicity of the final proof, her secret source. And it was wrong. Not just slightly off. Catastrophically wrong. She had discovered the error herself a week before she was set to defend her thesis. A subtle yet fatal miscalculation in the electron density variable so-called. When corrected, it didn't just reduce the efficiency. Under high-pressure conditions, the whole reaction became unstable. It created a volatile, explosive byproduct. She had told Albright. He had dismissed her concerns, called it pre-defense jitters. 2 weeks later, he published her original flawed research under his own name, and Kendrick's his former postdoc student. Her name was nowhere. The academic board sided with the tenured professor. Broken and buried in legal threats, she couldn't afford to fight. She dropped out, disappearing into the anonymity of the service industry. Now, 6 years later, her ghost had come back to haunt her on a rich man's napkin, and they were about to build a $100 million time bomb on top of it. Bella's breath caught in her throat. The investors were nodding. Harrison Sterling was reaching for the portfolio of contracts Mr. Davenport had slid across the table. A Mont Blanc pen appeared in his hand. The deal was seconds from being done. She could say nothing. She could let it happen. It wasn't her problem. She was just a waitress, fired for disrupting a high-profile dinner, blacklisted. Who would believe her? But she saw the headline in her mind. Sterling Dynamics plant explosion kills dozens. She saw the smug look on Kendrick's face, a man getting rich and famous off a lie that would get people killed. The old fire, the one she thought had been extinguished by years of grief and exhaustion, roared to life in her chest. Harrison Sterling uncapped the pen. The soft click echoed in the sudden silence of Bella's world. She moved before she could second-guess herself. Her feet carried her forward, silent on the plush carpet. She leaned over Sterling's shoulder, her professional waitress smile a mask of stone, as if to ask if he needed more bread. Her voice was a ghost of a whisper, meant for him alone, a tiny pinprick in the monumental silence of the deal. "Mr. Sterling," she breathed, her lips just inches from his ear. "Don't sign. That's the wrong formula." The world didn't stop, but for Harrison Sterling, it felt like it did. His universe was one of data control and calculated risks. It operated on a set of rigid, predictable principles. A waitress, an anonymous cog in the service machine of a restaurant he'd probably never visit again, did not whisper cryptographic warnings about quantum chemistry in his ear. It was a variable he couldn't compute. His hand holding the pen froze millimeters above the signature line. For a fraction of a second, his mind refused to process the words, dismissing them as an auditory hallucination. He half-turned his stormy eyes, locking onto Bella's. He saw a young woman, maybe late 20s, with dark, intelligent eyes that held a depth of seriousness utterly at odds with her role. There was no hint of a prank, no trace of madness. There was only a calm, terrifying certainty. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, a dangerous rumble beneath the surface of the conversation. The other 3 men at the table looked up their polite smiles, faltering. The spell was broken. Mr. Davenport lowered his glasses. "Is there a problem?" Harrison Bella didn't flinch under Sterling's intense scrutiny. She stood perfectly still, her professional poise unwavering, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. "My apologies, sir," she said, her voice still quiet, but clear and steady. "I misspoke." She began to retreat, the survival instinct screaming at her to flee. But Sterling wasn't letting go. He hadn't become a billionaire by ignoring anomalies. "No," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You didn't misspeak." "Say it again." Dr. Kendrick scoffed, a bubble of indignant laughter escaping his lips. "Harrison, what is this?" "The staff is interrupting." He shot Bella a look of pure venom, a glare that said, "You are fired before you even reach the kitchen." Bella's eyes flickered to Kendrick, and in them Harrison saw a flash of something he didn't expect, not fear, but contempt. It was the look of a superior, not a subordinate. She met Harrison's gaze again. The final term, she said, her voice dropping back into a whisper. "The probability function for the tunneling event, PQS. It's incorrectly defined. It doesn't account for relativistic effects on the electron shell at high energy states. It assumes a static electron density. It's not static." The room went completely silent. Mr. Davenport and Mr. Tanaka exchanged bewildered looks. They were fluent in profit margins and market caps, not quantum mechanics. Kendrick's face, which had been a mask of smug triumph, began to drain of color. He looked at Bella as if she were an apparition. That's absurd. Who are you to question my work?" "This is the most advanced research in the field." "It's stolen research." Bella said the words falling from her lips before she could stop them. The dam of her restraint had broken, and the person you stole it from realized the mistake 6 years ago. Under pressure, the catalyst won't just be inefficient, it will become unstable. The entire reaction will cascade. You're not building a green energy solution, Dr. Kendrick. You're building a bomb. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and they all hit their mark. Harrison Sterling's eyes narrowed, shifting from Bella's resolute face to Kendrick's suddenly panicked one. Kendrick was sweating. A single bead rolled down his temple. He opened his mouth, but only a strangled noise came out. That single physiological sign of fear was more damning than any confession. Harrison slowly, deliberately capped his Mont Blanc pen. The click was like a gunshot in the silent alcove. He placed it neatly beside the unsigned contract. "Gentlemen," he said to his investors, his voice a chillingly calm sea after a storm. "It appears we need to pause for a moment to verify a technical query. My sincerest apologies for the interruption. Please enjoy a dessert on me." Robert. He snapped his gaze, locking onto his scientist. Stay here. He stood up, his tall frame commanding absolute authority. He looked at Bella. You. With me. Now. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and strode out of the alcove, expecting her to follow. Bella felt 100 pairs of eyes on her as she placed the water pitcher on a nearby service stand, her hands moving with an automated grace she didn't feel. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Francois, was already power-walking towards her, his face a thundercloud. Rossi, what in God's name do you think you're doing? He hissed. Before she could answer, Harrison Sterling's voice cut across the dining room. He had stopped at the entrance, turning back. He didn't shout, but his voice carried an unmistakable weight that silenced the entire restaurant. She's with me, Francois, he said, using the manager's name with a familiarity that was both a shock and a threat. Add any damages to my bill. Francois froze mid-stride, his mouth agape. Bella straightened her apron, took a deep breath, and walked away from her table, away from her job, away from the life she had been hiding in. She walked past the gawking diners and the stunned staff, her head held high, and followed the billionaire out into the cool New York night, leaving $100 million deal and the ruins of her quiet life in her wake. The gilded cage was behind her, but she had no idea what lay ahead. The ride in Harrison Sterling's Maybach was a silent, tension-filled journey through the neon-streaked canyons of Manhattan. The car's interior was a cocoon of silent, opulent leather, a world away from the clatter of the restaurant kitchen. Bella sat opposite him, her hands folded in her lap, the simple black fabric of her uniform seeming out of place against the plush cream upholstery. She could feel his eyes on her, analytical and piercing, as if he were trying to deconstruct her into her base components. He didn't speak until they were ascending in a private high-speed elevator in a sleek glass tower in the financial district. The building was home to the global headquarters of Sterling Dynamics. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice flat. "Isabella Rossi. And you're a waitress." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that he was trying to reconcile with the impossible event that had just occurred. For the past 5 years, yes. And before that. The elevator doors opened into a sprawling, minimalist office. It was more like an art gallery than a workspace with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city. A single massive desk made of polished obsidian stood in the center. Bella hesitated, the ghosts of her past swirling around her. "Before that, I was a doctoral candidate in computational chemistry at Caltech." Harrison stopped and turned to face her fully. A flicker of understanding crossed his features. "Caltech. Who was your advisor, Dr. Marcus Albright?" The name landed with a quiet thud. Harrison knew him. Albright was a star in the academic world, frequently collaborating with private industry. "I've read his work," Harrison said slowly, "including his 2019 paper on proton transfer catalysis, the one he co-authored with a postdoc, Robert Kendrick." Bella's silence was her confirmation. The air crackled with unspoken implications. That paper, Harrison continued, his voice dangerously soft, was the theoretical foundation for our entire green hydrogen project. It's what I invested $80 million of R&D into, and it was based on a flawed premise, Bella said, her voice finally finding its strength. A flaw I found and reported to Albright a week before he published. He stole my thesis, removed my name, and published it with Kendrick. Harrison stared at her, his mind racing, piecing together the ugly puzzle. The ambitious professor, the eager postdoc, the brilliant but naive graduate student. It was a story as old as academia itself. "Why didn't you fight it?" he asked, his tone less an accusation and more a genuine inquiry, with what Bella's laugh was brittle. "I was a 24-year-old student with $50,000 in debt. He was a tenured department head with the full backing of the university. Their lawyers would have buried me. So I did the only thing I could. I disappeared." He led her to a conference room adjacent to his office. With a tap on a glass wall, it frosted over, becoming opaque. He gestured for her to sit at the long, empty table. He remained standing, pacing like a cuttled panther. "Tonight at that table, I was about to commit $100 million from my investors and leverage the future of my company on that formula," he said, thinking aloud. "If you are right, you didn't just save me from a bad investment. You saved my entire company from catastrophic failure and public disgrace. If you are wrong, you're a lunatic who just cost me the biggest deal of my life for nothing." He stopped pacing and leaned on the table, his hands flat, his face close to hers. "So Isabella Rossi, former Caltech prodigy, I need to know. How certain are you?" 100%, she said, without a moment's hesitation. "The math doesn't lie. Dr. Kendrick's math is lying. Prove it." It was the ultimate challenge. For the next hour, Harrison Sterling grilled her. He wasn't just a businessman. His own background was in physics and engineering. He threw complex questions at her, citing obscure principles of quantum electrodynamics and materials science. He was testing her, pushing her, trying to find a crack in her knowledge. He found none. Bella, freed from the constraints of her waitress persona, came alive. The years of repressed knowledge and passion flooded back. She talked about spin-orbit coupling, about relativistic quantum chemistry, about the limitations of the Born-Oppenheimer approximation in their specific context. She filled a whiteboard with equations, her handwriting swift and confident. The tired waitress was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp scientist. Harrison watched his initial skepticism melting away into a dawning sense of awe, which quickly curdled into a cold, hard fury, directed squarely at his head of R&D. As Bella finished deriving the corrected version of the pull function, Harrison's phone buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Davenport. "Harrison, what the hell is going on?" Kendrick just left the restaurant looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Tanaka is ready to walk." Harrison typed a quick reply. "Minor snag. Sit tight. I'll handle it." He looked up at Bella, a new expression on his face. It was one of calculated respect. "All right, Ms. Rossi," he said, his tone shifting from interrogator to commander. "You've convinced me there's a fire. Now I need you to help me find the arsonist. I'm giving you full access to our R&D servers. Everything. The raw data, the simulation logs, Kendrick's private project files. I want you to find me undeniable proof that he knew. I need the smoking gun." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "My company is now in your hands. Can you do it?" Bella looked at the complex equations on the whiteboard, her equations finally seeing the light of day. This was a chance not just for vindication, but for justice. A chance to reclaim the future that had been stolen from her. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction she hadn't felt in 6 long years. "I can." The Sterling Dynamics R&D lab was a stark contrast to the opulent executive suite. It was a cathedral of science, a sprawling, sterile white space, humming with the quiet power of supercomputers, and filled with the blue glow of holographic displays. For Bella, stepping inside was like taking her first breath after years of drowning. The scent of ionized air and clean room solvents was a perfume she had forgotten she loved. Harrison led her to a restricted access terminal in a glass-walled office. This was Kendrick's primary workstation. He explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You'll have my personal override. Level 1 clearance. Nothing is hidden from you." He tapped his security card and pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner. With a soft chime, the system unlocked. The screen flickered to life, displaying complex molecular models and reams of data. "My head of security, a man named Gavin, is a ghost in the system. He'll ensure Kendrick can't wipe anything remotely. But Kendrick is smart. If he's hiding something, it'll be buried deep," Harrison said. "I have to go and placate my investors. I'm buying you time. Use it well." He left her alone. The silence of the lab settled around her, broken only by the whisper of the server fans. For a moment, the sheer scale of the task was paralyzing. She was sifting through a mountain of data equivalent to the entire Library of Congress, looking for a single deliberately hidden needle. But then the muscle memory of a researcher kicked in. She started not with Kendrick's conclusions, but with the raw, unprocessed sensor data from the experimental catalytic reactor. This was where the truth lived, before it could be manipulated or massaged to fit a desired outcome. The hours bled into one another. Bella forgot she was a waitress in a cheap, worn-out uniform. She was a scientist on the hunt. She compiled terabytes of data, her fingers flying across the holographic keyboard, her mind navigating complex data structures with an agility she thought she'd lost. She found the first discrepancy at 3:17 a.m. It was in the logs for a simulation run from 6 months prior. The official report signed by Kendrick showed a perfect, stable energy output. But Bella, digging into the machine-level logs, found the original unaltered data stream. For a nanosecond at peak pressure, the simulation had recorded an anomalous energy spike, a massive, uncontrolled release of gamma radiation. It was exactly what her corrected formula predicted. "Got you," she whispered to the empty room. The simulation hadn't crashed. A sophisticated subroutine had kicked in, isolating the anomaly and flagging it as a sensor error before continuing the test under modified parameters. The final report was a lie constructed from the falsified data. Someone had programmed the system to ignore reality. Bella dug deeper, looking for the origin of that subroutine. It was a masterful piece of code designed to be almost invisible. But its digital signature was unique. She cross-referenced it across the entire network. And then she found it again. And again. Dozens of simulations, all with the same hidden flaw, the same automatic data scrub. Kendrick hadn't made a mistake. He had systematically and deliberately concealed the instability of the catalyst for over a year. As dawn approached, casting a pale grey light over the city, Bella found the next piece of the puzzle. It was a folder hidden within the operating system's kernel files, a place no one would ever think to look. The folder was named M.A. Contingency. M.A. Marcus Albright, her former professor. Her blood ran cold. The folder was protected by a layer of powerful AES-256 encryption. It was a digital vault. Without the key, it was impenetrable. Bella's mind raced. What would the key be? A password? A phrase? Something personal to Kendrick and Albright. She thought back to her time in the lab, to the arrogant pronouncements of her professor. Albright had been obsessed with the greats of physics. He often quoted one in particular when talking about discovery. Raffiniert ist der Herrgott, aber boshaft ist nicht. Subtle is the Lord, but malicious he is not. Einstein's famous declaration of faith in a rational universe. Albright loved to say it. With trembling fingers, Bella typed the German phrase into the decryption prompt. She hit enter. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then the screen flashed, decryption successful. The folder opened. It contained only 2 files. The first was a financial ledger. It detailed a series of untraceable cryptocurrency payments from a holding company in the Cayman Islands to an account linked to Dr. Robert Kendrick. The total came to $5 million. The name of the holding company was a simple, chilling anagram, Omnigen, Richard Hayes's company, Sterling's biggest rival. The second file was a short audio recording. Bella clicked on it. The voice that filled the silent office was unmistakable. It was Dr. Kendrick speaking to Richard Hayes. "The deal is set for tomorrow night," Kendrick's voice said, tinny and conspiratorial. "Sterling will sign. The investors will be locked in. Once they break ground on the first plant in Arizona, we give the data to our contact at the EPA. The anonymous tip. We show them the instability. Sterling Dynamics will be buried in lawsuits and regulatory hell. The stock will collapse. You'll be able to acquire their entire patent portfolio, including the real stable formula for pennies on the dollar." There was a pause, then Richard Hayes's smooth, predatory voice. "And the stable formula. You're sure you have it?" "Of course," Kendrick replied, and the next words hit Bella like a physical blow. Albright's little protege figured it out years ago, just before he pushed her out. He's been sitting on it ever since. The corrected pool function. It's a work of art. The key was adjusting the sigma value for relativistic effects. A small change, but it makes all the difference. Bella sank back into the chair, her breath knocked out of her. It was all there. The sabotage, the corporate espionage, the theft of her work not once but twice. Kendrick wasn't just hiding a flaw. He was planning to sell the cure to the highest bidder after the company he worked for was a smoking crater. She saved the audio file and the ledger to a secure external drive. She had her smoking gun. In fact, she had an entire arsenal. Just as she was about to call Harrison, an alert flashed in the corner of her screen. "Security warning, unauthorized Level 1 access detected. Sector 7G. Someone else was in the system with the same clearance level as her. She checked the access logs. The credentials weren't Harrison's. They were Kendrick's. But he was supposed to be locked out. Then she saw it. A remote deletion command was being executed, targeting the kernel directory where she'd found the encrypted folder. He was trying to cover his tracks. Gavin Harrison's security chief would stop him, but it would take a few seconds. In those seconds, the original files could be wiped forever. Bella didn't hesitate. She initiated a system-wide lockdown command, using Harrison's override to shut down all network access to the R&D servers. Her own terminal would be cut off as well, but it would be too late for Kendrick. A new warning flashed on her screen. This one more urgent. Physical breach alert, restricted lab. Level 3. Proximity sensor triggered. Someone was in the building. Someone was coming. And she was locked in the lab with the only existing copy of the evidence that could destroy them. The quiet hum of the servers was suddenly replaced by a much more menacing sound, the heavy metallic thump of a magnetic lock engaging. Bella was sealed inside the lab. The lockdown command had worked, but it had also turned her sanctuary into a trap. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. Kendrick wasn't just trying to delete files from home. He was here. He must have used a physical keycard or an old passcode that Gavin's digital sweep had missed. He was coming to destroy the evidence at its source. She looked around the sterile room. There were no weapons, no hiding places, just glass walls and glowing machines. The main door to the lab was a thick slab of reinforced steel. She watched the small security panel next to it. A red light blinked ominously. Access denied. System lockdown. She heard a muffled shout of frustration from the hallway, followed by a series of frantic beeps as Kendrick tried his keycard again and again. He was locked out. But for how long a man desperate enough to commit industrial sabotage on this scale wouldn't be stopped by a locked door? Bella's mind, trained to find solutions in complex systems, went into overdrive. She had the evidence on the thumb drive in her pocket. The original files were safe on the isolated server, but if Kendrick got to the terminal, he could physically destroy the machine. She needed to get out. She raced back to the workstation. The lockdown had severed her connection to the outside world. No phone, no internet. But she still had control of the lab's internal network. She pulled up the building schematics. The lab was part of a larger research wing, a labyrinth of clean rooms, server farms, and testing chambers. The lockdown had sealed the entire wing, but there might be another way out. Her eyes scanned the blueprints. A service corridor. A maintenance hatch designed for coolant pipe access. It was small, but it led into the building's ventilation system. It was a crazy movie plot idea, but it was the only one she had. From the hallway came a new sound, a high-pitched whirring noise. A drill. He was trying to bypass the electronic lock. She was running out of time. She located the maintenance hatch behind a large server rack. It was secured with 4 heavy bolts. Using a heavy metal stool as a wrench, she threw all her weight into turning them. Her muscles, accustomed to carrying trays and not turning industrial bolts, screamed in protest. One by one, with a groan of stressed metal, they gave way. She pulled the heavy panel open, revealing a dark, dusty shaft just big enough for a person to crawl through. Cool, recycled air washed over her face. She hesitated for a second, then hoisted herself inside, pulling the heavy panel closed behind her. Total darkness. The air was cold and smelled of dust and machine oil. She was in the guts of the skyscraper. Using the light from her phone, which had no signal but still worked as a flashlight, she began to crawl. The sounds of Kendrick's drill faded behind her, replaced by the deep, rhythmic hum of the building's life support. The schematics she had memorized were her only guide. Left at the first junction, then right past a massive air circulation fan that churned the air with terrifying force. It was a claustrophobic nightmare, but the drive in her pocket felt like a talisman pushing her forward. She was aiming for a vertical shaft that she hoped would lead down to the lower, non-secured floors. As she crawled, her mind kept replaying the audio file. Albright's little protégé figured it out years ago. The casual, dismissive cruelty of it fueled her resolve. This wasn't just about Harrison Sterling's company anymore. It was about reclaiming her own name. Suddenly, her phone screen went black. The battery was dead. The darkness was absolute. The humming of the fans seemed to grow louder, more menacing. Panic, cold and suffocating, began to close in. She was lost, blind, in a metal maze 60 stories above the ground. She fought it down, forcing herself to breathe slowly. She could still feel the flow of air. The schematics were burned into her brain. She kept crawling, navigating by touch and memory. After what felt like an eternity, her hand touched a different texture. A ladder. The vertical shaft. Relief washed over her so intensely her knees went weak. She began to climb down, her hands and knees scraped raw by the rough metal. She descended 2 floors before her foot hit a solid surface. Another access panel. She pushed. It swung open with a rusty creak, flooding her eyes with the dim artificial light of a deserted office floor. She tumbled out, covered in dust and grease, her waitress uniform torn and stained. The floor was empty, a sea of dark cubicles. It was a sales department, an entirely different section of the building. She had made it out of the lockdown zone. She ran for the emergency stairwell, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. She burst through the door and didn't stop running, taking the stairs 2 at a time, descending floor after floor. As she reached the ground-level lobby, she saw them. Harrison Sterling, flanked by 2 formidable-looking security guards, was arguing with the night shift staff. He looked frantic, his usual composure completely gone. "Miss Rosie Isabella!" He shouted, his voice filled with a mixture of raw panic and immense relief as he saw her emerge from the stairwell. She stumbled towards him, exhausted but triumphant, and held up the small black thumb drive. "I have it, Mr. Sterling," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "I have everything." Just as he took the drive from her hand, the lobby elevator chimed. The doors slid open. Standing inside was Dr. Robert Kendrick. His face was pale, his suit disheveled, and his hands were covered in grease. In one hand he clutched a portable drill. His eyes widened in shock as he saw Bella standing with Harrison. He looked from her to the drive in Harrison's hand and back to her face. In that single silent moment, he knew he was finished. His desperate gamble had failed. He made a sound, a choked guttural cry of despair, and lunged. Not for Harrison or the drive, but for Bella. It was a purely instinctual, hateful act, an attempt to destroy the person who had brought his world crashing down. But he never reached her. Harrison's security guards moved with startling speed, intercepting him in a blur of motion. They tackled him to the marble floor with a sickening thud. The drill clattered away across the polished surface. The great Dr. Robert Kendrick, the man who had almost duped the world, was reduced to a writhing, defeated figure on the lobby floor of the company he had tried to destroy. Harrison ignored the commotion. He looked at Bella, at her torn clothes, and the exhaustion etched on her face. He saw not a waitress, but a warrior. "Let's go finish this," he said, his voice quiet, but filled with the promise of a reckoning. The emergency board meeting was convened in the main conference room on the 60th floor, the very room Bella had been in just hours before. The sun was now fully up, casting long, dramatic shadows across the city. The mood, however, was dark and stormy. Mr. Davenport and Kenji Tanaka sat at the long obsidian table, their faces grim. They had been summoned by Harrison in the pre-dawn hours with a message that was both cryptic and alarming. They looked exhausted, confused, and deeply skeptical. $100 million deal didn't get paused by a waitress without serious consequences. Bella sat beside Harrison at the head of the table. She had been given a chance to clean up in a private washroom, but she had refused to change out of her torn and grimy waitress uniform. It was a statement. It was who she was when this began, and she would wear it as a badge of honor at the end. The door opened, and 2 of Harrison's security guards escorted a pale, haggard-looking Dr. Kendrick into the room. His wrists were in silver handcuffs. They sat him down at the far end of the table, opposite Harrison. The silence was heavy enough to bend steel. "Gentlemen." Harrison began, his voice cold and precise. "I apologize for the dramatics of the past few hours. When we last spoke, a serious allegation was made against the integrity of our project. I felt it was my duty to investigate it thoroughly before proceeding." He nodded towards Bella. "This is Isabella Rossi. She is the individual who brought this matter to my attention. She is also, as it turns out, the true architect of the foundational theory our entire project is based upon." Davenport and Tanaka stared at Bella, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and dawning curiosity. "That's preposterous," Kendrick spat from the end of the table, his voice cracking. "She's a nobody, a disgruntled, failed student trying to blackmail her way into a fortune." Harrison ignored him. He slid a tablet to the center of the table. "Robert, you're right about one thing. Ms. Rossi is a brilliant scientist. So brilliant, in fact, that she not only identified the flaw in your formula, she also found where you buried the evidence of your fraud." He tapped the tablet. A file directory appeared on the large screen at the end of the room. It showed the contents of the MA contingency folder. As you can see, Harrison continued, his voice dripping with ice. Dr. Kendrick was not merely incompetent. He was malicious. He knew the catalyst was unstable. He systematically programmed our simulation software to fake the results and hide the danger. He played the audio file. Kendrick's conspiratorial voice filled the conference room, laying out the entire plot to bankrupt Sterling Dynamics and sell the corrected formula to Omnigen. When Richard Hayes's voice came on, Kenji Tanaka let out a sharp, angry hiss. Omnigen had been a thorn in his own firm's side for years. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Kendrick had shrunk in his chair, his face ashen. Mr. Davenport looked like he had been punched in the gut. "The $5 million in cryptocurrency has already been traced," Harrison said calmly. Half went to Kendrick. The other half went to his accomplice, Dr. Marcus Albright at Caltech, who provided him with the corrected formula, Miss Rossi's corrected formula, which they planned to sell after my company was in ruins. Kendrick finally broke. "He made me do it," he shrieked, pointing a trembling, cuffed hand towards the speaker from which his own voice had come. "Hayes." He approached me. He knew about the flaw. Albright told him. They said Sterling was a fool and I was wasting my talent. They offered me everything." His voice trailed off into a pathetic sob. "Harrison." Sterling rose to his feet, his towering frame radiating a cold, righteous fury. "You didn't just try to defraud my investors and me," he said, his voice low and menacing as he walked toward Kendrick. "You were willing to build a facility that could have exploded. You were willing to let people die to cover your tracks and cash in. The only reason that isn't happening is because of her." He gestured to Bella. "Because a woman you and Albright dismissed and tried to erase had more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire body. She was working for minimum wage, cleaning up after people like you. Yet she had the courage to speak up to prevent a catastrophe while you were counting your blood money." He stopped directly in front of Kendrick. "You're not just fired, Robert. I'm going to personally fund the federal investigation into you, into Albright, and into Richard Hayes. I will spend whatever it takes to ensure that you all spend the rest of your miserable lives in prison cells. Get him out of my sight." The guards hauled the weeping Kendrick to his feet and dragged him from the room. Harrison walked back to the head of the table. He looked at Davenport and Tanaka, whose expressions had transformed from skepticism to horrified respect. "Gentlemen," he said, his tone shifting back to business, "the Sterling Kendrick catalyst is dead. However," he looked at Bella, a genuine admiring smile touching his lips for the first time. "The Rossi catalyst is very much alive, Ms. Rossi has provided me with her corrected formula. It's not just stable. It's 20% more efficient than even Kendrick's faked data predicted. We are not back at square one. We are a light year ahead of where we thought we were." He picked up the contract portfolio that had been sitting on the table since the night before. With a decisive rip, he tore the signature page in half. He then turned to his laptop, typed for a moment, and a new document projected onto the screen. It was a new partnership agreement. "This is a new deal," Harrison announced. "Sterling Dynamics is forming a new subsidiary to oversee this technology. It will be called Rossi Sterling Innovations. Ms. Rossi will be appointed its Chief Technology Officer with a 25% equity stake and full creative control over the research. That is my non-negotiable term." "Are we still in business?" Mr. Davenport and Kenji Tanaka looked at each other. They looked at the new projections on the screen. Then they looked at Bella, the quiet waitress in a torn uniform, who now held the keys to the future of green energy. Davenport broke into a wide grin. "Mr. Sterling," he said, extending a hand, not to Harrison, but across the table to Bella. "It would be an honor to invest in Ms. Rossi's company." 6 months later, Isabella Rossi stood in a lab that made the one at Sterling Dynamics look like a high school chemistry classroom. The Rossi Sterling Innovation Center was a testament to what could be achieved when brilliance was given the resources it deserved. Sunlight streamed through vast 3-story windows, glinting off state-of-the-art equipment that Bella herself had hand-picked. She wore a crisp white lab coat over a simple but elegant dress. The black waitress uniform was a distant memory, a skin she had shed. Her team of 20 elite scientists, whom she had hired from the best universities in the world, worked diligently around her, their faces alight with the passion of discovery. The centerpiece of the lab was a gleaming pilot-scale catalytic reactor. Today was its first full-power activation. Harrison Sterling stood beside her, his usual bespoke suit replaced by a lab coat identical to hers. The investors Davenport and Tanaka watched from a safe glass-enclosed observation deck, their faces beaming. Ready CTO Rossi Harrison asked a playful but respectful tone in his voice. They had become partners in the truest sense of the word, their relationship built on a foundation of mutual admiration and a shared vision. "Ready, CEO Sterling," she replied with a confident smile. She initiated the startup sequence. On a massive monitor, data began to stream in. Pressure, temperature, energy input. And finally, the catalytic efficiency rating. The numbers climbed steadily, surpassing the old flawed projections, surpassing even her own corrected estimates. It settled at a number that made the whole room gasp. 78% efficiency. Harrison breathed his eyes wide. "Bella, that's impossible. The math doesn't lie," she said, softly echoing her own words from that fateful night. A round of applause erupted from the observation deck. Bella felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. It was more than just success. It was a restoration. Later that day, she sat in her spacious, sunlit office, the one that had replaced Harrison's imposing obsidian suite. A framed napkin hung on her wall, not the original from Aurelia, but a new one. On it, in her own handwriting, was the correct formula, the Rossi equation. The small subscript R for Rossi and the REL for the relativistic correction were a quiet testament to her victory. Her personal phone buzzed. It was a picture from her mother, who was on a cruise in the Mediterranean. Her medical bills paid off her health better than it had been in years. "Thinking of you, my brilliant daughter," the message read. There was a knock on her door. It was Harrison. "I have some news you might find interesting," he said, holding out a tablet. The headline was from a major financial journal. Omnigen CEO Richard Hayes indicted in corporate espionage scandal. Former Professor Albright and scientist Kendrick to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. Justice. It wasn't just an abstract concept. It was real, and it was deeply satisfying. They deserved it, Bella said simply. They did. Harrison agreed. He looked around her office at the woman she had become, or rather the woman she had been all along. "It's funny," he mused. "I went to that dinner to sign a $100 million deal. I thought I was buying a formula. But it turns out I found something infinitely more valuable." "And what's that?" Bella asked, a curious smile playing on her lips. "The person who wrote it," he said. "I just had to look past the uniform to see her." Bella looked out the window at the city skyline, no longer a barrier of unattainable lights, but a landscape of possibility. Her past was not an anchor, but a foundation. She had walked through the fire of betrayal and emerged not burned, but forged. She was Isabella Rossi, and she was finally, truly home. In the end, it wasn't about the money or the fame. It was about integrity. Isabella Rossi's story reminds us that our circumstances don't define our worth. The world may see a waitress, a cashier, a janitor, but inside each of us can be a mind capable of changing the world. It's a powerful lesson in courage, the courage to speak truth to power, even when your voice is shaking. Harrison Sterling thought he had all the answers, but the most important truth came from the one person in the room everyone else had been trained to ignore. What hidden talents and forgotten dreams are lying dormant inside you, just waiting for the right moment to speak up? If this story inspired you or made you think, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to share it with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. For more stories about the hidden heroes and incredible twists of fate that shape our world, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The clinking of silverware against fine china was the only sound that dared to break the tension in the Davenport dining room. At the head of the table, Catherine Davenport, the perfect hostess, in a sapphire silk dress, watched her husband's mistress. The woman, Chloe, had a smile that dripped with condescension, a victor's smirk aimed right at Catherine. She thought she had won. She thought this dinner was her official welcome into the family, the final nail in the coffin of a tired marriage. Across the table, my husband Robert beamed at her, oblivious, but the silence stretched thin, pulled taut by a secret only I knew. I was waiting for the chime of the doorbell for the final guest whose arrival would turn that smug smile into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The game was mine, and the final move was about to be played. The scent of blooming night jasmine and old money clung to the air in the Davenport estate. It was a perfume Catherine had grown accustomed to, a constant reminder of the life she lived, but no longer felt she owned. Their home, a sprawling colonial revival mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, was less a home and more a museum of a perfect life. Each room was curated, each piece of art meticulously chosen mostly by her to project an image of effortless wealth and stable happiness. It was a beautiful, convincing lie. For 15 years, Catherine had been the perfect partner to Robert Davenport, the visionary CEO of Exion Tech. She had been his anchor as he built his empire from a garage startup to a global powerhouse. She'd hosted the dinners, charmed the investors, and managed the charities, all while gracefully stepping back to let his star shine brightest. She had put her own career as a promising art historian on indefinite hold, convincing herself that his success was their success. But over the past year, the gilded cage had started to feel suffocatingly small. The cracks in their perfect facade were beginning to show fine as spiderwebs, but just as intricate. Robert was distant, his phone always angled away from her, his nights at the office growing longer and more frequent. He'd explain it away with talk of a new product launch, a hostile market, the endless pressures of being at the top. He would touch her cheek with cold fingers and call her honey, the endearment now sounding hollow, a placeholder for genuine affection. The first tangible piece of evidence arrived innocuously, a receipt from a high-end jeweler fallen from his coat pocket. It was for a diamond tennis bracelet, a piece far too flashy for Catherine's classic taste. Her birthday had passed months ago, and their anniversary was still far off. When she'd casually asked if he'd been shopping for a client's wife, he'd frozen for a fraction of a second, a flicker of panic in his eyes, before the smooth corporate mask slid back into place. Just a preemptive thank you for a major board member's wife, he'd said, his voice a little too smooth. Greasing the wheels, you know how it is. She knew how it was. She also knew Robert was a terrible liar when caught off guard. Then came the scents. Not the familiar masculine fragrance of his Creed cologne, but a sweet, cloying perfume that smelled of tuberose and ambition. It lingered on his shirts when he came home late, a ghostly signature of another woman. She'd hold the expensive cotton to her nose, the floral scent a punch to the gut, a confirmation of the betrayal she felt coiling in her stomach. The final straw was the phone call. She'd picked up his ringing phone from the nightstand one Saturday morning while he was in the shower. The caller ID was just a single initial C. She hesitated, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her finger hovered over the screen before she declined the call. When Robert came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, he saw the phone in her hand, and his face hardened. "What are you doing?" he'd asked, his voice sharp and accusatory. "Your phone was ringing." "A C," she said, keeping her own voice even, a calm she did not feel. He snatched the phone from her. "It's a colleague. We're in a crisis with the server rollout in Asia. You shouldn't be snooping, Catherine." He called it snooping. She called it stumbling upon a truth he was trying to hide in plain sight. That night she didn't sleep. She lay beside him, feeling the chasm between them widen into a canyon. The man she had loved, the life she had helped build, was all becoming a mirage. She was not a fool, and she would not be made into one. The idea for the dinner party came to her in the cold pre-dawn light. It was an annual tradition, a formal dinner for Robert's parents, George and Margaret Davenport. They were old-world patriarchs, people who valued legacy, family, and above all appearances. This year, Robert had insisted on adding a special guest. Chloe Jensen, he had announced a week ago, not meeting her eyes. "She's my VP of strategy, an absolute rock star. She's been instrumental in the new Triton project, and I think it's important for Mom and Dad to meet the future of the company." Catherine had felt a cold dread settle over her. She'd heard the name before whispered among the executive wives. The brilliant, beautiful, and ruthlessly ambitious Chloe Jensen. She typed the name into her laptop, and the screen filled with images of a sharp-featured blonde with eyes that seemed to hold a challenge. There were articles praising her business acumen, photos of her at industry events, always standing just a little too close to Robert. The future of the company. The words echoed in Catherine's mind. It was a test. He was flaunting his affair, daring her to object, daring her to make a scene. He was trying to normalize her presence, to slowly phase Catherine out, and this woman in. A slow, cold fury began to burn where her grief had been. He thought she would simply crumble, that she would accept this humiliation with quiet dignity. He had underestimated her. He had forgotten the intelligent, strategic woman he had married. She would host this dinner. She would play the part of the gracious wife. But it would not be Chloe Jensen's coronation. It would be a reckoning, and it would unfold on her terms in her house under the watchful eyes of the family whose name Robert was so carelessly tarnishing. She stood up and walked to her vanity, looking at her reflection in the ornate silver mirror. The face looking back was tired, the eyes shadowed with pain, but there was a flicker of something else there now. Resolve. The gilded cage had been of her own making, but she still held the key, and she was about to unlock the door, not to escape, but to let the wolves in. The decision to hire a private investigator felt like a betrayal of the woman she used to be, the woman who believed in trust in the sanctity of her vows. But that woman was gone, replaced by a pragmatist, forced to navigate a battlefield she never wanted to enter. She found Mr. Peterson through a discreet referral from her lawyer, a man who specialized in complex marital asset protection. The name itself was a cold euphemism for the ugly reality of high-stakes divorce. Mr. Peterson was nothing like the grizzled detectives from old movies. He was a man who blended in with a mild face graying hair and an entirely forgettable demeanor. He wore a simple, well-pressed suit and spoke in quiet, measured tones. His office was a sterile, anonymous space in a downtown skyscraper, far from the prying eyes of their social circle. "Mrs. Davenport," he began, his voice calm and professional. "Before we proceed, I need you to be certain. Once we start down this path, the information we find cannot be unfound. It will change things. Permanently." "I am aware," Catherine said, her hands clenched in her lap. "I need the truth, Mr. Peterson. All of it. I need to know what I am up against." She provided him with everything she had. Robert's schedule, his flight details for business trips, the name Chloe Jensen, and the license plate number of the unfamiliar Tesla she had once seen parked in his private spot at the office. She felt a wave of shame as she handed over the details, as if she were the one committing an act of espionage. But the shame was quickly replaced by a cold sense of purpose. This was not about jealousy anymore. It was about survival. The first report landed in her secure encrypted email inbox a week later. It was concise, professional, and utterly devastating. The file contained a series of photographs. The first few showed Robert and Chloe Jensen leaving the Exion Tech Tower, their body language professional but close. Then there were photos of them at a secluded table in the Oak Room, a restaurant Robert had once claimed was too stuffy for their date nights. In the photos, Chloe was laughing, her hand resting on Robert's arm. He was looking at her with an expression Catherine hadn't seen on his face in years, a look of pure, unguarded admiration. The final photos were the ones that made her breath catch in her throat. They were taken outside a boutique hotel in the city, a discreet place known for its privacy. Robert was opening the door for Chloe, his hand on the small of her back. The timestamp confirmed it was a Tuesday afternoon when he was supposed to be in a board meeting. Mr. Peterson's summary was brief. Subject Robert Davenport and Ms. Chloe Jensen appear to be engaged in an ongoing extramarital affair. Meetings are regular, occurring 2 to 3 times weekly. Recommend continued surveillance to establish a comprehensive pattern and identify further assets. Catherine closed her laptop, a wave of nausea washing over her. Seeing the photographic proof was different from merely suspecting. The abstract fear had solidified into a cold, hard reality. The woman with the condescending smile she'd seen in press photos was sleeping with her husband. She was the one receiving the diamond bracelets, the one sharing intimate dinners, the one who was slowly and methodically erasing Catherine from her own life. She called her best friend Jessica Riley. Jessica was a sharp, no-nonsense art gallery owner who had known Catherine since college. She was the only person Catherine trusted implicitly. "It's confirmed, Jess," Catherine said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain steady. "He's having an affair with her, the vice president." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, followed by a string of curses directed at Robert that made Catherine almost smile. "That absolute swine," Jessica seethed. "After everything you've done for him, what are you going to do? Cat, are you going to confront him? Do you want me to come over and help you throw his bespoke suits onto the lawn?" "No," Catherine said, the cold resolve returning, pushing past the pain. "A scene is what he expects. It's what she expects. They think I'll get hysterical, emotional. They're counting on it. It would make it easier for them to paint me as the unstable, scorned wife. So what's the plan? You can't just let this happen." "I have this dinner party," Catherine explained, pacing the length of her sunroom. "The one for his parents. He's invited her." Jessica gasped. "He what? Oh, that arrogant monster. He's bringing his mistress to meet his parents at your dinner table. He's framing it as a professional introduction, showcasing his star executive." Catherine said, her voice dripping with irony. I think this is my opportunity. I can't fight him on his turf in the boardroom or in the courts, not yet. But the home, the family, that's my turf. I need to do something that he and she will never see coming." "What are you thinking?" Jessica asked, her voice a mix of concern and intrigue. "I don't know yet," Catherine admitted, "but I need more information. I need to know everything about Chloe Jensen, not just the professional resume she polishes for the world. I need to know who she really is." She ended the call with Jessica and wrote back to Mr. Peterson. Her instructions were simple and direct. Forget Robert for now. Focus entirely on Chloe Jensen. I want to know everything. Where she lives, who her friends are, her family, her financial situation, her romantic history. Every skeleton in her closet. I want it all. As she pressed send, Catherine felt a shift within herself. The victim was receding, and in her place, a strategist was emerging. Robert and Chloe thought they were playing a simple game of chess where she was just a pawn to be sacrificed. They were about to find out she was the one controlling the entire board. For the next 2 weeks, Catherine lived a double life. On the surface, she was the dutiful wife discussing menu options with the caterer, selecting the perfect vintage of Bordeaux from their cellar, and confirming the floral arrangements for the Davenport family dinner. She exchanged pleasantries with Robert, a carefully constructed mask of civility, hiding the tempest raging within her. He seemed relieved by her compliance, mistaking her calm for surrender. This was, he likely thought, going to be easier than he'd imagined. Beneath the surface, her encrypted inbox became the center of her universe. Peterson's reports on Chloe Jensen started to paint a picture not of a simple home wrecker, but of a woman as calculating and ambitious as Robert himself. Chloe had clawed her way up the corporate ladder with a potent combination of intelligence and ruthlessness. She had a small, chic apartment in a trendy part of the city, paid for by a salary that was handsome, but not extravagant enough to explain her collection of designer handbags or her frequent weekend trips to St. Bart's, trips that often coincided with Robert's business conferences. The reports detailed her life with forensic precision: her gym schedule, her favorite coffee shop, the small circle of friends she kept. But it was all a carefully curated image. There were no messy relationships in her past, no public missteps. She was clean, polished, and seemingly invulnerable. Catherine started to feel a flicker of despair. What leverage could she possibly have against a woman so meticulously self-controlled? The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Catherine was reviewing the latest file from Peterson, a dry report detailing financial background checks. She scrolled through pages of bank statements and credit card summaries, the numbers a meaningless blur. Then one line item caught her eye. It was a recurring monthly payment from Chloe's account, a direct debit of $3,500 to a joint checking account. The name on the joint account was C. Jensen and D. Porter. Her heart skipped a beat. Who was D. Porter? She scanned the document again. A few lines down there was another connection, a mortgage statement for a modest suburban house in a town 30 miles away. The mortgage was in two names, Chloe Jensen and Daniel Porter. Catherine stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening thud. She immediately replied to Peterson's email, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Who is Daniel Porter? The reply came less than an hour later, and it changed the entire game. Daniel Porter is Chloe Jensen's husband. They have been married for 5 years. He is a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm, Finley & Rowe. They have no children. Public records indicate they are still legally married and cohabiting at the address on the mortgage, though our surveillance suggests Ms. Jensen spends approximately half her nights at her city apartment. Porter appears to be unaware of the affair. Attached is his photograph. Catherine clicked open the attached file. The man who stared back was ordinary. He had kind eyes, slightly thinning brown hair, and a gentle, unassuming smile. He was wearing a fleece vest over a button-down shirt, looking like a man who enjoyed hiking on the weekends and coaching Little League. He was the complete antithesis of Robert Davenport's slick, predatory charisma. He looked like a good man, a man who was being played for a fool just as she was. A wave of emotions washed over her shock pity, and then a white-hot, clarifying rage. This wasn't just an affair. This was a whole other level of deceit. Chloe wasn't just a mistress trying to secure a rich husband. She was a married woman, hedging her bets, building a new life with Robert's money and power, while keeping her safe, stable husband waiting in the wings. She was playing them both. The plan, which had been a nebulous concept of revenge, suddenly sharpened into focus. It was audacious, it was brutal, and it was perfect. A simple confrontation would be messy and unsatisfying. A quiet divorce would let them both off too easily. But this was a way to expose them both for everything they were in front of the very people whose opinions they valued most. She picked up her phone and dialed Jessica. "I have it." Catherine said, her voice low and steady. "I have the weapon." "What is it?" Jessica asked, her voice hushed with anticipation. "Her name is Chloe Jensen, and she has a husband." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "No, you're kidding me." "His name is Daniel Porter. He's an accountant, and he has absolutely no idea what his wife is doing." "Oh, Kat," Jessica whispered. This is biblical. I need a plausible reason to get him to my house for dinner on Saturday night." Catherine said, her mind already working, spinning the threads of her intricate web. A reason Robert wouldn't question. "The foundation," Jessica said instantly. "Your literacy foundation. You're launching the annual fundraising drive. You need a pro bono audit or some financial planning advice. His firm Finley & Rowe could be a new corporate sponsor you're courting." It was perfect, plausible, professional, and completely above suspicion. It would place Daniel Porter in her home as a legitimate guest, an unsuspecting pawn in a drama whose climax was known only to her. Catherine spent the next day making the arrangements. She called the main line at Finley & Rowe using her full name and the name of her foundation. She was, as she expected, put through to a senior partner. She explained her proposal, a potential partnership, a request for some preliminary advisory work. She mentioned she'd been given the name of one of their senior accountants, Daniel Porter, as a man with a keen eye for non-profit finances. The partner was delighted. A chance to get in with the Davenports. He'd have Daniel Porter call her back within the hour. When Daniel called, his voice was just as she imagined, polite, professional, and slightly nervous. He was utterly starstruck to be speaking with Catherine Davenport. She was charming and gracious, explaining the situation and the upcoming family dinner. "It's dreadfully last minute, I know," she said, her voice laced with the perfect amount of apologetic sincerity. "But my husband and his parents are so keen to hear about this year's fundraising strategy, and I thought what better way than to have the expert there to walk them through it. It would just be a brief informal chat over dinner, a chance for us all to get acquainted." Daniel was flustered and flattered. A dinner invitation to the Davenport estate. It was a massive opportunity for his firm, for his career. "Of course, Mrs. Davenport," he stammered. "I would be honored. I'll just need to check with my wife, make sure we don't have plans." Catherine's blood ran cold for a second. "Of course," she said smoothly. "Family first." A few hours later, he called back, his voice beaming. "All clear, Mrs. Davenport. My wife has a work thing she can't get out of anyway, so the evening is free. I'll be there." A work thing. Catherine felt a bitter smile touch her lips. Chloe Jensen's work thing was a dinner party where she planned to solidify her position as the next Mrs. Davenport. She had no idea her husband would be there to witness her coronation. The final piece was in place. All the actors were set to take the stage. Catherine was no longer the director hiding in the wings. She was the star of the show, and she was ready for her performance. The day of the dinner party dawned with a crisp autumnal chill. The sky over Greenwich was a painter's canvas of grey and pale blue, and the manicured lawns of the Davenport estate were dusted with a light morning frost. For anyone else, it was a perfect Saturday. For Catherine, it was the day of the reckoning. She moved through the morning with a strange, almost out-of-body calmness. The storm of her emotions, the grief, the rage, the anxiety had settled into a hard, dense core of purpose in the pit of her stomach. There was no more room for doubt. There was only the plan. She personally oversaw every detail. She instructed the florist to create arrangements of white hydrangeas and eucalyptus, beautiful but funereal. She chose the menu with deliberate care, a rich lobster bisque to start, followed by a rack of lamb. All dishes that required concentration and a steady hand, dishes that were difficult to eat when one's world was collapsing. The wine she selected was a 1998 Chateau Margaux, the year she and Robert were married. A subtle, poignant touch that only she would understand. In the late afternoon, she retreated to her dressing room. She laid out her chosen armor, a simple, impeccably tailored sheath dress of sapphire silk. The color was bold regal. It was not the soft pastels Robert preferred her to wear. It was the color of a deep, cold ocean. She sat at her vanity, the silver-backed brushes and crystal perfume bottles glinting in the light. This was the same vanity where she had cried silent tears just weeks ago. Now, looking at her reflection, she saw a different woman. The softness around her eyes had been replaced by a steely clarity. The tremor in her hand was gone. Robert came in as she was clasping a string of pearls around her neck, his own wedding gift from 15 years ago. He was already in his suit, looking as handsome and confident as ever. He smiled at her reflection in the mirror. "You look stunning, Catherine," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Ready for tonight?" "Of course," she replied, her voice even. "I want to make a good impression on your guest." He caught the slight emphasis on the word your, but chose to ignore it. "Chloe is brilliant. You'll like her. And it's important for Mum and Dad to see the caliber of people I have at Aixion. It will reassure them. Reassure them that he had a succession plan in place for both his company and his life," she thought. "I'm sure it will be a very illuminating evening for everyone," she said, turning to face him. She adjusted his tie, her fingers brushing against his neck. The gesture was intimate, familiar, and utterly devoid of warmth. For a moment he seemed to lean into her touch, a flicker of the old connection in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the cool calculation that now defined him. "Good," he said, stepping back. "I'll go down and check on the wine. Don't want Dad complaining about the temperature again." As he left, Catherine allowed herself a single deep breath. The performance was about to begin. Downstairs, the house was glowing. Soft light emanated from every lamp. The fireplaces in the drawing room and dining room crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the polished hardwood floors. The long mahogany dining table was set for 5, Robert herself, his parents George and Margaret, and the guest of honor, Chloe Jensen. A 6th-place setting remained conspicuously absent, waiting in the wings of the pantry, ready to be placed at the perfect moment. George and Margaret Davenport arrived first, punctual as always. George was a stout, imposing man with a booming voice and a firm belief that the Davenport name was synonymous with integrity. Margaret was his quiet, observant counterpart. A woman of few words, she missed nothing. Her sharp blue eyes surveyed the room, the floral arrangements, and Catherine's dress, giving a slight approving nod. "Catherine, my dear," Margaret said, kissing the air beside her cheek. "Everything looks wonderful as always. You have a gift for these things." "Thank you, Margaret. I do hope it's a memorable evening," Catherine replied, the double meaning hanging in the air, unheard by all but herself. Robert played the part of the proud host, pouring his father a glass of vintage scotch and engaging him in a loud discussion about the stock market. Catherine guided Margaret to the sofa, making small talk about the upcoming charity gala. It was a scene they had played out 100 times, a perfect portrait of familial bliss. And then the doorbell chimed. Robert's face lit up. "Ah, that must be Chloe," he said a little too eagerly. He strode to the grand foyer to answer the door himself, a gesture of familiarity that did not go unnoticed by his mother. Catherine stood her back to the fireplace, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She could hear Robert's enthusiastic greeting, followed by the light, confident tones of a woman's voice. And then they were standing in the archway to the drawing room. Chloe Jensen was even more striking in person. She was tall and slender, in a form-fitting black dress that was just a touch too daring for a family dinner. A diamond tennis bracelet. The diamond tennis bracelet sparkled on her wrist. Her blonde hair was swept into a sleek chignon, and her smile was bold and dazzling. But her eyes, as she scanned the room, held a cool, appraising quality. They flickered past George and Margaret, landing on Catherine. And she smiled. It was not a polite, deferential smile. It was a smile of ownership of victory. It was the smile of a woman who believed she was looking at her past, a relic soon to be replaced. In that single expression, she was telling Catherine, "I'm here. I've won. This is my house now, my family, my man." Catherine met her gaze and smiled back, a serene, placid smile that revealed nothing. "Miss Jensen," she said, her voice like cool water. "Welcome to our home. We are so delighted you could join us." The politeness of it, the sheer unruffled calm, seemed to momentarily wrong-foot Chloe. She had expected tears, hostility, a scene. She had not expected grace. But she recovered quickly. "Please call me Chloe," she purred, gliding into the room and extending a hand to George and then Margaret. "It's an absolute honor to finally meet you both. Robert speaks of you constantly." The air crackled with unspoken tension as they moved into the dining room. Robert, playing the fool, seated Chloe to his right in the place of honor, traditionally reserved for his mother. Margaret's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, but she said nothing. The trap was set. The players were in their places. All Catherine had to do now was wait for the final unsuspecting guest to arrive. The conversation around the mahogany table was a masterpiece of subtext and veiled hostility. On the surface, it was polite dinner-party chatter. Beneath it was a battle of wills. Chloe Jensen was a skilled performer. She directed the conversation with the precision of a seasoned executive, seamlessly transitioning from a discussion of Aexion's market shares with George to praising Margaret's charity work. She was charming, witty, and utterly captivating. She spoke of Robert with a proprietary reverence, recounting stories from the office that highlighted his genius, her tone implying an intimacy that went far beyond the boardroom. "Robert has this incredible ability to see 10 steps ahead of everyone else," she said, her eyes gleaming as she looked at him. "He's a true visionary. It's a privilege to be on his team." "We're certainly proud of his accomplishments," George boomed, clearly impressed by this brilliant young woman who so openly admired his son. Catherine watched a silent observer at her own table. She played the role of the perfect hostess, ensuring glasses were filled and plates were cleared, her movements fluid and unhurried. She listened to Chloe's sycophantic praise of her husband, a man who was actively dismantling their life together. With every triumphant glance Chloe sent her way, every subtle touch of Robert's arm, Catherine felt not pain, but a growing, chilling sense of power. They were digging their own graves, and she was simply letting them have the shovels. "Catherine, you're very quiet this evening." Margaret observed her sharp eyes, missing nothing. She had noticed the seating arrangement, the overly familiar way Chloe spoke to her son, and the icy calm of her daughter-in-law. Before Catherine could respond, Chloe cut in with a laugh that was light and tinkling, but held an edge of steel. "Oh, I'm sure we're boring her with all this shop talk. It must be difficult to keep up when you're not in the corporate world." It was a direct hit, a condescending jab at Catherine's life, painting her as a kept woman, out of touch and irrelevant. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing to defend his wife. He was complicit in her humiliation. Catherine simply smiled, a small enigmatic curve of her lips. "On the contrary," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension. I find it fascinating. It takes a great deal of focus to pursue one's ambitions so single-mindedly. She let her gaze rest on Chloe for a beat too long. I'm sure your family must be incredibly proud of all you've sacrificed for your career. Chloe's smile tightened. It was a subtle parry, a reminder that Chloe's life existed outside this room, a fact she seemed keen to forget. The lobster bisque was served. As Chloe lifted her spoon, she made her next move. You know, this house is just breathtaking, she sighed, looking around the opulent dining room. The architecture, the art. It has such wonderful bones. You could do so much with it if you just modernized it a bit. She was redecorating. In her mind, she was already mistress of the house, envisioning how she would tear down Catherine's life and build her own upon its ruins. Robert, completely oblivious to the undercurrents, jumped in. Chloe has a fantastic eye for design. She's been consulting on the aesthetics for our new corporate campus. I can imagine, Catherine said, taking a delicate sip of her soup. A fresh perspective can be so invigorating. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching the tension thinner. Catherine could feel it building a palpable force in the room. Her heart was beating a steady, heavy rhythm against her ribs. It was almost time. She knew from Mr. Peterson's report that Daniel Porter was meticulously punctual. His train would have arrived at 7:15 p.m., and a pre-arranged car would have him at their gate by precisely 7:30 p.m. She glanced at the grandfather clock in the hall. It was 7:28 p.m. As if on cue, the faint, distant chime of the doorbell echoed through the house. Every head at the table turned. Robert looked confused. Are we expecting someone else? He asked Catherine, a hint of annoyance in his voice. He hated surprises. George and Margaret looked at Catherine expectantly. Chloe's face was a mask of curiosity, her spoon frozen halfway to her lips. This was the moment. The precipice. Catherine placed her napkin on the table beside her plate. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. Yes, she said, her voice ringing with a newfound clarity that made everyone stare. I am. A final guest. She smiled, a genuine, brilliant smile that did not quite reach her eyes. I took the liberty of inviting a business associate of my own. I hope you don't mind. Without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked out of the dining room, her silk dress whispering against the floor. She walked through the grand foyer, her steps echoing on the marble. She reached the heavy oak door and took one final steadying breath. She opened it, and there on the doorstep, looking slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the house, was Daniel Porter. He was holding a leather briefcase and smiling his kind, unassuming smile. Mrs. Davenport, he asked, his voice polite. I'm Daniel Porter. I hope I'm not late. Mr. Porter, Catherine said, her voice warm and welcoming. You've arrived at the perfect time. Please come in. Everyone is dying to meet you. Catherine led Daniel Porter from the grand foyer toward the archway of the dining room. He was understandably nervous, clutching his briefcase like a shield. His eyes wide as he took in the soaring ceilings and expensive art. He was a man from a different world, a world of spreadsheets and quiet suburban streets, now thrust into the lion's den. For a fleeting moment, Catherine felt a pang of guilt for what she was about to do to him. But it was a necessary cruelty, a detonation required to clear the rubble of all their lives. As they stepped into the dining room, all conversation ceased. The four people at the table stared at the newcomer. Robert's expression was one of pure confusion, tinged with irritation at this interruption. George and Margaret looked on with polite curiosity. But it was Chloe's face that Catherine watched. As Daniel stepped into the full light of the chandelier, Chloe was mid-laugh at something Robert had said. Her head was thrown back, her lipstick-stained mouth open. Her eyes sparkling with triumph. Then her eyes met Daniel's. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The color drained from her face, leaving a sickly, waxy pallor. Her triumphant smile didn't just fade, it collapsed, melting away, as if the muscles in her face had suddenly ceased to function. Her jaw went slack, and her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. The wineglass in her hand trembled its contents, sloshing dangerously close to the rim. In that 1 second, the queen of the corporate world, the victor in this domestic war, became a cornered, terrified animal. Daniel, for his part, was simply bewildered. His gaze swept the table until it landed on his wife. "Chloe," he said, his voice a mixture of shock and confusion. "What are you doing here? You said you had a strategy off-site in Stamford." His words hung in the air, heavy and damning. Chloe couldn't speak. She just stared at him, her chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. Robert finally found his voice, looking from Chloe's horrified face to the bewildered man in the doorway. "You two know each other?" he asked, his CEO's mind struggling to process data that didn't compute. It was Catherine who answered, her voice cutting through the thick, suffocating silence. She stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Daniel's arm, a gesture of alliance. "Everyone," she said, her voice as calm and clear as a bell. "I'd like you to meet Daniel Porter. He's a brilliant accountant from Finley and Rowe who is graciously advising my foundation." She paused, letting the first piece of information settle before delivering the masterstroke. "He is also Chloe Jensen's husband." The word husband dropped onto the table like a grenade. George Davenport's jaw dropped. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes sharp and discerning, darting from Chloe to her son, the ugly truth dawning on her face. Daniel looked from Catherine to his wife, his kind face crumpling in confusion and dawning hurt. "Husband Chloe, what is going on? Who are these people?" But it was Robert who finally understood. He stared at Chloe, his face a mask of disbelief, turning slowly to fury. He had been played. He, Robert Davenport, the master of the universe, had been made a fool of. His prize, his rock star, VP, was not a free agent. She was married. To this man. This ordinary, unassuming accountant. The humiliation was a poison, and it was spreading through him visibly. "Your husband," Robert choked out the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. He turned his furious gaze on Chloe. "You're married," Chloe finally snapped out of her paralysis, her survival instincts kicking in. "Daniel, this is a misunderstanding," she stammered, pushing her chair back and rising shakily to her feet. "This is a work dinner. Robert is my boss." "Your boss," Daniel said, his voice trembling now with the first stirrings of anger. "You told me you were in Stamford. You lied to me." He took a step forward, his eyes locking on the glittering diamond bracelet on her wrist. "Where did you get that?" "We can't afford that." The accusation was raw, real, and devastatingly public. Catherine stepped back, her work done. She was merely the conductor. The orchestra of chaos was now playing a symphony of its own. "She lied to you, Robert?" Catherine said, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. "Just as you've been lying to me," She walked over to a sideboard and picked up a slim manila folder she had placed there earlier. She opened it and slid a photograph across the polished table toward Robert's father. It was a picture taken by Mr. Peterson, showing Robert and Chloe kissing passionately outside the boutique hotel. George Davenport picked it up. He stared at it for a long moment, his face turning a deep apoplectic red. He slammed the photo down on the table. "Robert, what is the meaning of this? In your own home, with your wife present. And she lied to you, Daniel." Catherine continued her gaze now on the heartbroken accountant. She slid another photo across the table to him. It showed Chloe alone entering the jeweler's where the bracelet was purchased. The receipt was tucked neatly beside it. She is a very ambitious woman. It seems she was hedging her bets, seeing which husband offered the better long-term investment. The room imploded. "Get out!" Robert roared, pointing a trembling finger at Chloe. All his affection had curdled into pure, venomous rage. He was not angry because of the betrayal, but because his reputation was being destroyed in front of his parents. "Get out of this house, you sanctimonious bastard!" Chloe shrieked back, her carefully constructed facade shattering completely. "Don't you dare act like a victim. You were begging me to leave him. You told me you were going to leave her." Daniel let out a choked sound, a gasp of pure pain as he finally understood the full scope of the betrayal. He looked at his wife, the woman he had loved and supported, and saw a stranger. Margaret Davenport, who had been silent until now, stood up. Her voice, though quiet, was colder and sharper than any shout. She spoke to her son, but her eyes were fixed on Catherine. "Robert, you have brought a profound and disgusting shame upon this family. You have humiliated your wife and dishonored our name." She then turned her gaze to Chloe. "And you young woman are filth." With that, she turned and walked stiffly out of the room. George, after one last look of utter disgust at his son, followed her. The dining room was a war zone. Chloe was sobbing a mixture of rage and terror. Robert stood shaking with fury. Daniel looked utterly broken, his face pale with shock. Catherine remained standing by the sideboard, calm amidst the wreckage she had wrought. She had not raised her voice. She had not cried. She had simply presented the truth, and the truth had been a more powerful weapon than any emotional outburst could ever be. The smug smile was gone from Chloe's face, replaced by a mask of utter ruin. Robert's arrogant confidence was shattered. The game was over, and she had won. The aftermath of the dinner party was swift and brutal. The sound of George Davenport's departing Bentley roaring down the gravel driveway was the closing bell on Robert and Catherine's life as they knew it. Chloe, hysterical and exposed, tried one last desperate appeal to Robert. "We can fix this, Robbie," she pleaded, reaching for his arm. He flinched away from her touch as if he'd been burned. "Don't you ever speak to me again," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. The public humiliation had severed any feeling he had for her. She was no longer an asset. She was a liability of catastrophic proportions. He pointed toward the door. "Leave. Now." Daniel Porter, who had been standing frozen in a state of shock, finally moved. He looked at his wife, his eyes hollow with a pain that was awful to witness. "Chloe," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Give me your keys. I'll meet you at home. We have to talk." There was no anger left in him, only a vast, empty landscape of sorrow. Without another word, a sobbing Chloe stumbled out of the dining room and out of the house, her dream of becoming the next Mrs. Davenport, turning to ash around her. Daniel gave Catherine one long, searching look, a look that held a universe of pain, but also a flicker of gratitude for the terrible truth, before he turned and followed his wife out into the cold night. And then there were two. Robert and Catherine stood at opposite ends of the magnificent dining room, the wreckage of the carefully planned meal, a mirror of the wreckage of their marriage. The air was thick with the ghosts of accusations and the stench of betrayal. Robert finally turned to her, his face a thunderous mask of fury. "Are you happy now?" he spat. "You couldn't just leave with dignity, could you? You had to create this circus to humiliate me in front of my own parents." Catherine met his rage with an unnerving calm. "You seem to be confused, Robert," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You are not the victim here. You humiliated me every day for the past year with your lies. You humiliated me by bringing your mistress into my home. You humiliated our marriage, our history. What I did tonight was not humiliation. It was clarification." She walked slowly toward him, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "You thought I was just a part of the decor, something to be managed and eventually replaced. You grossly underestimated me." "I underestimated your capacity for cruelty," he shot back. "No," she corrected him. "You underestimated my capacity for survival. You and she started a war. You just didn't expect me to fight back with a better strategy." She stopped just a few feet from him. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours on Monday morning. I want the house. I want the art collection we curated together. And I want a settlement that reflects the 15 years I invested in your career, in this family, in a partnership you treated like a disposable asset. Given the circumstances and the testimony of your parents and Mr. Porter, I suspect you won't want to fight me in a public court." His face paled. She had him. The threat of a messy public divorce with his formidable mother, likely testifying against him, would be devastating to Aexian Tech's stock price and his own carefully crafted reputation. He was trapped. "You have planned this all," he whispered, a note of grudging awe in his voice. "I learned from the best," she replied, a bitter smile on her lips. "You taught me everything I know about ruthless strategy." She turned her back on him, then a final act of dismissal, and walked out of the room, leaving him standing alone amidst the ruins. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings and quiet goodbyes. Robert moved out his things packed up by professionals, his presence in the house fading until it was nothing more than a ghost. The divorce was brutally efficient and quiet, just as she had predicted. Robert, under immense pressure from his father, agreed to all her terms to avoid a public spectacle. Chloe Jensen disappeared. She was fired from Aexian Tech the following Monday, her corporate ascent ending in a spectacular crash. Catherine heard through the grapevine that Daniel had filed for divorce immediately. Chloe had lost both her husband and her millionaire, her ambitious gamble, leaving her with nothing. Catherine, meanwhile, began the slow, deliberate process of reclaiming her own life. She had the entire house repainted, erasing the neutral beiges Robert had loved, and replacing them with warm, vibrant colors. She sold the 1998 Chateau Margaux and used the money to fund a scholarship for young female art historians. One afternoon, a month after the dinner, she was in her study, which she had converted back into a workspace for her own research, when she received a call from Jessica. "Are you sitting down?" Jessica asked. "What is it?" "The gossip columnist for the Post just called me for a comment. Apparently George Davenport has forced Robert to take an extended sabbatical and has installed an interim CEO at Aexion. The board is citing personal reasons for his departure." Catherine felt a slow, satisfied smile spread across her face. The final domino had fallen. She ended the call and looked around her study. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On her desk were books on Italian Renaissance art, her old passion, now her present reality. She was no longer Catherine Davenport, the CEO's wife. She was just Catherine. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like more than enough. The gilded cage was gone, its bars melted down by the fire of a woman who had refused to be broken. She was free. And there you have it, a story not just of betrayal but of incredible strength and strategic brilliance. Catherine Davenport could have chosen to be a victim to cry and crumble as her world fell apart, but instead she chose to be the architect of her own justice. She turned her pain into power and used her enemies' arrogance against them in the most spectacular way possible. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many people wear a mask of politeness while hiding a core of steel? What would you have done in her shoes? Would you have confronted him, or would you have set the stage for a reckoning he would never forget? If this story of calculated revenge and ultimate empowerment resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a story of a woman taking back her power. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another gripping real-life drama. And please leave a comment below. Let us know which part of Catherine's plan impressed you the most. We can't wait to hear from you.